And we are recording. Hey there, everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of the Bore and Stoke podcast, brought to you by the 50th anniversary Honda Goldwing. This time around, you'll see that there's one person from our crew missing. We've got myself, we've got Nick, and we've got Dennis. Ryan is on vacation, a much-deserved vacation, so you'll see him the next time we do one of these. And before we go any further, let's take a hot sec and hear from our sponsor. 50 years ago, Honda introduced the Goldwing and totally rewrote the book on long-distance riding. Today, it's still setting the standard with that iconic flat-six engine, integrated nav, and premium audio. And while we didn't invent podcasts, we're bringing a fresh take on this one to the moto world. So hey, maybe in 50 years, we'll be celebrating our podcast anniversary, just like Honda is celebrating the Goldwings. Brought to you by Honda Powersports, this episode is powered by the 50th anniversary Goldwing. If you're going to ride something legendary. Okay, and we are back from the break. This episode, guys, is going to be a pretty full one. Lots to talk about, as there always is. Lots of new bikes to talk about, and at the end of this, we'll talk about some bikes that we've ridden and that we've tested. So, without further ado, let's get to the first order of business, and that is the feature called Destination Ontario. Ryan and I flew out to Toronto and then rode up north about another 4 or 5 hours to visit the North, capital T and capital N, to see some of the dirt roads, the unpaved trails. Because last year when we did the Destination Ontario feature, we got touring bikes, the Honda Goldwing, the Yamaha Tracer, and a Harley Street Glide, and just kept our route on pavement. And each time we crossed a dirt path, Ryan got really excited and wanted to go explore, but we couldn't on those big things. And so it was only right that we came back and did it again on some big adventure bikes. So go check that out if you haven't already. There's a written story and a video component to that. Seeing Canada during the fall on the super eastern end and northern end of the country. We were out there, so it was a lot of fun. It was really beautiful. I caught a pretty nasty cold, just like the one Dennis has right now. We'll try to keep his talking to a minimum. But yeah, check it out if you haven't already. All right, with that out of the way, the first order of business here, let's go with MV Agusta. So by now, you'll have seen, hopefully, here on Motorcycle.com, that MV Agusta has released a new Brutale. It's the MV Agusta Brutale Serie Oro. Sorry, I should roll my R. Serie Oro. If you know MV Agustas, the Serie Oro line is a special edition line. There will be a standard production version to come at a later time. But being a special edition, this one, gets some special touches, some fancy new things. But the biggest order of business as far as the new Brutale goes is the engine. So, Nick, you know a little bit more about what's happening with this new Brutale. Can you give us the little overview here?
So if you guys remember from about a year or two ago, Ryan Adams went overseas and rode the MV Agusta Enduro Veloce, which used a brand new 931cc inline triple engine, or inline 3-cylinder engine. And that's essentially what we're using here. So according to MV Agusta and their handy dandy little presentation that we just sat through, the Brutale Serie Oro uses the 931cc engine, but it's completely reworked. So it makes a lot more horsepower, it makes a lot more torque, and realistically, yes, it shares the same bore and stroke, so it does have the same displacement, but the whole top end is different. It has a different cylinder head, different intake, different pistons, updated clutch, new camshaft with more aggressive profiles, new head gasket, which I assume is thinner, although they didn't specify, different valves, just everything is new from the top end up. Now, bottom end is more or less the same, but what we're looking at is a claimed 148 horsepower and 78 foot-pounds of torque, which is quite a bit. And if you think about the quote unquote middleweight category as it stands, that means MV Agusta is positioning this thing, well, kind of above what Yamaha is doing with its 890cc triple cylinder engine. It's definitely above the Triumph 765 triple cylinder. It's above the KTM 990 parallel twin engine, which is a 947cc engine. And it's above the Ducati Street Fighter V2 engine, again, 890cc. It's the most powerful in class if you just rate it based on claimed numbers. And actually, it matches up a lot closer to the old Ducati Street Fighter engine, which was the 959?
955.
955. Yes.
Yeah.
Not branded 959.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's quite a bit of horsepower. And that 150 horsepower spot, for my money, when I look at, just horsepower figures in the raw, that 120 to 150, that's kind of the sweet spot for performance for me, in my opinion, because I think you can maximize that on the racetrack, and it's, it speaks to a larger potential in terms of skill levels. And on the street, it's not just insane. Troy and I have both ridden superbikes on the road, 200 plus horsepower superbikes. And kind of as cool as they are, you can only use 15% at any given time because it's pretty a bit much overkill. And this seems a lot more realistic. Still, 150 ponies in the quote unquote middleweight class is kind of getting back up there again. I thought we were going the other direction, but
yeah. I mean, it seems like manufacturers are kind of getting more in tune with the fact that these big horsepower sport bikes and naked bikes, they're cool on paper, and they're even cool to ride. But us being in the position we're in, we're like, man, would we actually own one of these? Yeah, it's cool to twist the throttle on a 200 horsepower anything. But then the reality of actually owning one sets in, and you're like, that's a lot to handle, just ownership wise, tires especially, when I could have just as much fun, if not more, in the canyons, on the roads, on the track, whatever, with, like you said, Nick, 120 to 150 horsepower. Maybe age is getting to us.
No, I think probably just common sense. And, supporting all of this, it is an all new bike. So, MV Agusta is unveiling the Brutale Serie to basically unveil its new strategy with the Brutale line. And they've also explained that the current generation Brutale 800RR is still going to be in place. That's going to be what they call the gateway into the MV Agusta brand. And then you have the Brutale Serie Oro, followed up by a standard production model. They did specify that it will not have a displacement number attached to it. So much like the singer formerly known as Prince, or artist formerly known as Prince, it's just going to be the Brutale, or how the Monster just became Monster. That said, it is the middle bike between the Brutale 1000 and the 1000RR. So naming strategy could be, it's a little interesting, but the rest of the bike is new as well. So it has a brand new steel trellis frame, still harkens back to the traditional MV Agusta sort of design ethos, using a single-sided swing arm with a steel trellis frame. You also have updated Öhlins fork and shock. It's a Nix 30 fork and then TTX 36 shock, as well as Brembo high pure calipers. So super, super high spec componentry. Again, this is a limited edition model, and we expect that as such. And then stylistically, they really do borrow from the traditional Brutale design ethos, which is interesting because when it came out, a number of years ago, Dennis might be able to correct me, but when was the first Brutale released?
Oh, when was that?
I don't have time to look that up.
20 plus years ago.
Yeah. 2 decades ago. It was pretty futuristic. I think Troy's right. I think it was 2001ish or something like that, and or 2002, and yeah, it looked quite futuristic in the same way that Ducati's 749 and 999 styled bikes that looked incredibly futuristic, and they've sort of aged into modernity. They seemed a bit out of place at the time, and now they're sort of looking a lot more contemporary. And so they've retained a lot of those stylistic cues that we'd recognize an MV Agusta for. And so realistically, when you first see it, you're like, oh yeah, that's a Brutale. But then you compare it to the previous generation, and there's a lot of subtle changes that sort of add up to make something different. That said, unmistakably Brutale, whether you love it or hate it, totally up to you. I'm not going to make your decisions, and I'm not your mom. So, it's definitely something that we want to keep tabs on, performance wise and above, because there's a lot of changes, especially the chassis, because they mentioned that they went with a softer strategy. They've also lengthened the swing arm. And one of my sort of critiques about the Brutale in the past, the 800RR in particular, pretty demanding on the road. When you rode it fast, you really were able to extract a lot of it. And then, because it's a shared chassis between that and the F3, as a super sport bike, you're like, oh, it's good stuff. But as a street bike, it can be a little bit taxing. So, not for nothing.
Yeah, no, MV seems to be making some big moves, and they will be making some moves. Interesting. They don't really seem to be that impacted from the divorce from KTM, so it's kind of like they're just going to carry on as normal. Potentially not carrying on as normal will be Zero Motorcycles. They've announced that they are moving their headquarters from California to Europe, I believe in Amsterdam, somewhere in, I think it was Amsterdam. That kind of makes sense considering the European market has quickly become Zero's biggest market. And so it just, from an operational point of view, makes sense for them to move across the pond. Now, they're going to keep a lot of their R&D and test teams in their Scotts Valley not headquarters. I guess now it'd be the former headquarters in Scotts Valley, California. So the American side isn't completely gone yet, but it kind of speaks to maybe the EV market in the bigger sense that Zero is moving to Europe. Would you guys agree, disagree?
Yeah. I mean, they're really just sort of going to where their sales are. The United States has not been as receptive to EV motorcycles as it has with cars. And that sort of is, I would say that's more of a reflection of our market, where motorcycles are looked at as a luxury item in a lot of cases, or something that's used for entertainment, whereas other enlightened nations ride motorcycles more for commuting and things of that nature. So the European market has really embraced EV, not just in terms of automotive, four wheel, but with EV scooters, with EV motorcycles. And while they definitely have not taken over ICE by any stretch of the imagination, they're selling a lot more units in Europe than they are back home. So from a business perspective, it makes sense. From a American motorcyclist perspective, it is a bit sad to see a manufacturer leaving, because they were a homegrown entity, and whether you look at it as something that's very important to you, it's interesting to see.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something to be said about the fact that Zero is still in business compared to pretty much all of its competitors before it, or that have come before. And since, a lot of other, not a lot, but there have been some other electric motorcycle companies that have come and gone. Say what you want about Zero, but they're still here. They're still making bikes. And if moving to Europe helps keep them in business, I think the motorcycling community as a whole is better off for it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And speaking of people that are going to stay in business, looks like Indian Motorcycle sold to a private equity firm. Um, there's a meme that involves the Grim Reaper going from door to door. I think a lot of our viewers will be familiar with this, but that's what comes into my mind when I hear sold and then private equity. Um,
Not
so I
only
think Dennis
that,
is going to have a lot more info on this.
yeah, not only just private equity, but people with no former experience with this kind of thing.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
It's a weird situation because I mean, for the last year we've been talking a lot about the boardroom drama at Harley Davidson on the other side of the American market here. So this kind of came out of, I wouldn't say out completely out of nowhere, because we kind of were seeing that Indian wasn't performing great for Polaris, but it was still kind of shocking to see a majority stake being sold off.
This is kind of like one of those moves where the board at Indian saw all the drama happening at Harley and said, "Here, hold my beer and watch this." Sorry, I
Yeah,
had to make that
that
joke.
age old competition that they've been fighting forever. There's God, it doesn't matter what the competition is. We're gonna get into it.
Anyway, sorry, Dennis. Keep going.
And I mean,
muted.
you're right. And you're right. The new owners, Carolwood, they are primarily focused on real estate properties and some media properties as well too. But they don't have much of a history in anything that's either in a vehicle space or even manufacturing. Nothing that they own. None of the companies that they own actually produce a physical product besides food. So this is something entirely new for them. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. What does help is that they have a former Harley Davidson executive running things going forward.
All right, what's the over under? I mean, like, this is so bizarre that it's even hard for us to forget predict the future. Just think about the present. Like, what's happening here? What's gonna happen?
Yeah, I mean we're taking stabs in the dark right now, but I would say the network and financial support of having Polaris back your company versus the alternative, um, just from a I don't know, I guess a sensible take is Polaris is already in the power sports industry, and they make a lot. So they're kind of a one-stop shop when it comes to understanding the nuances of the power sports industry. Of course, they make snowmobiles and side-by-sides and things like that. And so I think they're probably a lot more sensitive to the what can be a somewhat erratic sales market, boom or bust sort of deal. Whereas I think other investors may not be as friendly to that. And this is just speculating here, but I'm kind of wondering if the new owners might be quick to jump ship when they see that it's not the cash cow that they think it is. Because as we know, none of us make a whole lot of money in the motorcycle industry, and I don't think the manufacturers do either. So there's that aspect of it. But
Well, I mean, you're right, yes, but also Polaris's cash cow is the side by side business, and those
oh yeah,
things are those things are selling hand over fist, and they must be thinking these motorcycles are just a parasite for us when we could just dump our resources into our bread and butter and make even more money.
And yet they're keeping Slingshot.
that is a big question mark right there, my
that's
friends.
that's what I'm curious about, because they're getting rid of the majority of their on-road product, Indian motorcycle, but they're keeping Slingshot, which is still a very niche product. And I can't imagine it being like, if you were to ask me which of the two properties Polaris would most likely get rid of, I would have gone with a 3-wheeler. I don't know
Fair.
about you guys.
Fair.
I would say from a business case, yes, because slingshot is just beyond niche. The only sort of correlation or justification that I can think of is that slingshot is pretty adjacent to a side-by-side, and there's a lot of carryover equipment. So from a manufacturing and development perspective, maybe it's a lot of copy and paste, and it's not something that's really extracting or requiring just a completely different set of engineers and blah, 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 blah. Whereas Indian Motorcycle is a straight up different product, top to bottom. Different powertrains, nothing's really carried over quite the same way. Whereas the slingshots are using CVT engines or engines with CVTs, and they share a lot of stuff. They're just missing a wheel and the ability to turn properly. But
So tell me this anecdotally. How many of you guys have seen slingshots out in the wild?
every now and again, I will see them in Malibu, California specifically.
And Dennis?
I see them a lot more than you would think for a colder climate, for a vehicle that primarily has no roof.
Yeah. Yeah. And oddly enough, every now and again, I see them around my area too. And everyone who's driving one thinks they're the coolest person on the planet.
Have you ever seen a slingshot lane split? Because technically it can. It's considered to be a motorcycle in California. So I've actually seen them lane split. It's pretty wild.
I bet that's something Ryan has tried. I know he has with the Can-Am Spider, but that's besides the point. Anyway,
yeah, again, smaller version of the same thing.
Right, yeah. Exactly. But no, whatever happens next for Indian clearly is we're all keeping tabs on it and we're all interested in what happens next because that's a pretty big shakeup. So fingers crossed. I hope things go well. Everything, we'd love to have more manufacturers in the industry and not less, and especially Indian to keep the rivalry between it and Harley alive. As you may like it, you may not, but I think it keeps things interesting in this industry. So definitely hope for the best for them. All right, moving on to a company that we would be shocked if they went out of business. Honda. So Honda just confirmed the CB1000GT. Dennis, I think you were the one that uncovered this. Tell us a little bit more about it.
The information comes to us from vehicle filings in Australia, of all places, and we have actual images of the bike from the front and the rear. The GT is based on the Hornet, the CB1000 Hornet, with very similar chassis, different tuning to the engine, but has like a partial fairing and a tall windscreen and longer suspension. The GT is the same engine, but tuned to put out about 147.5 horsepower. That's much less than the 155 for the Hornet SP. There's also a base Hornet, which we don't have here in the US, that produces probably closer to the GT's output, but it's only available in Europe. But the engine is... That's frustrating.
I think we can carry it from here.
Yeah.
No, the Hornet seems to be a pretty good bike for Honda, and the SP version too. When Tom Roderick wrote it at the intro, he came back pretty happy about it. And I mean, looking at the photos and just the idea of a GT version, I think this GT version looks pretty sharp. Looks pretty nice. Put some saddlebags on it. I can already see there's the mounts on the tail section for some luggage, at least as far as I can tell. It better have luggage. Like, I think it has all the makings of a good sport touring bike that can go. It's got to go head to head with like the Tracer 9 GT, the Suzuki GSX S1000 GT, blah 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 blah. It's right there with the competition, and I don't see why or how it couldn't perform as well as its peers.
What we don't know yet is whether this will be offered here in the US. So far, I can only confirm Australia and Europe.
Yeah,
Hondas tend to kind of lag behind a little bit on the US products. They usually release the Hornet, for example, was Europe first. So I wouldn't be surprised if this comes in a little bit later.
right. I think I would be surprised if it doesn't come to the US eventually, whenever that is. I think Nick, you're going to say something.
Yeah, we've been noticing that Honda's definitely delaying its product availability between markets. So the European market, for example, as Dennis mentioned, received the Hornet 750 as well as the Hornet 1000 in some cases a couple seasons before we ever got them. Likewise, the NT 1100 was out for a few years prior to the US market receiving it. And that's really fixated with the road side of Honda's offerings. If you look at it contrastingly and look at Honda's off road stuff, the US market tends to lead that by a healthy margin. And that's because the US market is a pretty off road dominant market overall. Whereas Europe is, well, they like their naked and sport touring bikes quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe, US sales might not be strongest for this category, but I'd have to think they're strong enough to warrant the bike coming here.
Yeah, for sure. I think it'll eventually come here, but it's sort of the BMW syndrome a little bit. It gets announced, Europe gets it, and then we get it a good while later. And really, that just comes down to production schedules. And thing that we need to remind our viewers and listeners is that manufacturers allocate production based on sort of the importance of that market. And like I hinted at before, the US is definitely the leader in terms of off-road product, whereas Europe is the leader in terms of on-road product, depending on the model. So Honda is not alone in this strategy, but you can imagine a situation where the lead market is going to get the lion's share of that initial production run, and then it sort of just goes down the ladder from there.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of off road, it's a good transition to the next topic for us. Kawasaki, three models worth talking about this time around. Let's start with the KLE500. It's a off-road bike, like a little mini adventure looking thing. Inexpensive, looks pretty trick if you're looking for a low displacement or smaller displacement adventure bike. Dennis, you're the one who posted about this as well. I mean, seems like a potential hit on Kawasaki's hands.
As far as we know so far, the hitch is that they haven't completely released all the specifications yet, so we don't know how much it weighs, which will be a significant factor here. But what we do know is that the KLE kind of fills in the gap between the Versus X300 and probably maybe the KLR. It's not as big as it's a smaller engine than the KLR's large single, but it's liquid cooled. It's same parallel twin that's in the Ninja 500 and the Eliminator. So it's an engine that we are now familiar with. And the chassis the design looks it's very rally influenced with the kind of like rising front end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a 21-inch front wheel, which shows that it's more off-road focused than you would find on Kawasaki's Versys models.
Yeah, it looks to me like Kawasaki is really leaning in on the popularity of adventure bikes and or smaller displacement adventure bikes that um, always seem to be in style. So I think there's some potential here for people who are looking for an inexpensive, smaller adventure bike, and especially if you know the history or you're a fan of Kawasaki and the KLRs. Um, this could be a good horizontal, maybe even a vertical move for you. And then, yeah, for what? Under 7 grand for the base model, and then just a little 7.5 for the upspec SE version. Seems like a pretty good deal for what should be a stout little bike. And then speaking of stout little bikes, the other Kawasaki, the Z650S, the quote unquote sportier version of the Z650, Kawasaki also announced that. And when I look at this bike, I get a lot of, well, Dennis, you called it Sugomi vibes. That's what the S stands for. I see a lot of
For us, at
shades
least.
of
I
this.
mean, Kawasaki doesn't
Right.
actually say what the S stands for. We kind
Right.
of There's a lot of marketing fluff there. They call it stunning style spotlight, which okay. Um,
Well, when I look at it, I see a lot of Z900 baked into it, which I guess makes sense considering it's all part of the same family. Um, so what? We've got a little bit different headlight, a little bit different fuel tank styling, some bars, but by and large, mechanically, it's the same bike as the Z650.
what's interesting is that in Europe they are offering this alongside the regular 650, and it looks like in the US it will be replacing it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. At least in the US market, it seems like they'd be cannibalizing their own sales if they offered both bikes together, but what do I know? Um, and then lastly, for the Kawasaki Brigade, there's the 2026 Z900RS. Minor updates to meet Euro 5, right? Or Euro 5 Plus, excuse me. So fill us in with that, Dennis.
Well, a lot of the changes are not surprising because we saw them with the regular modern looking 900 last year. Kawasaki just decided to hold off on the RS model for 1 year. But the updates are similar. There's a ride-by-wire throttle, cruise control, an IMU, and all the electronic ride arrays that go with it. Visually, it looks the same, which means it looks like the 1972 Z1, Z1,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the same kind of
Depending on
graphic scheme,
which side of the pond you're on.
the duckbill tail. So visually, it looks the same, which has kind of been a pattern with Kawasaki lately. But it's just what's under the hood that's really different here. And if you don't really care about the electronics, I can see for a retro bike like this, a lot of people would say, I don't need it. But realistically, for a lot of markets like Europe, that's kind of necessary for bikes now.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of cool to get a retro themed motorcycle, but you don't have the retro problem. So, ride by wire throttle, that means we're not dealing with carburetors. And then you have all the rider aids that follow up on that. And, that's always just a beneficial thing for me. And a lot of consumers that we run into, readers and stuff, that's also something that's very important to them too. Plus, it's part of the law in Europe, and that's how it is.
But ultimately makes for a better motorcycle, I think, overall in the grand scheme of things. So I've liked the way the Z900RS looks. These little updates just kind of make it on paper, make it a sweeter bike to ride. Hopefully we'll get to sample one in the not too distant future.
Okay, and then speaking of vintage-themed motorcycles, we have the 2026 update for Triumph's modern classic line, which encompasses all things Bonneville related. So that's quite a bit of models, and if I get my numbering correctly, I think that's 7 models in total. Is that correct, Troy?
I think you are right. Yes, 7 models. Yeah.
Yes, so that's going to be your Bonneville T100, your T120, your Speedmaster, your Speed Twin, etc., etc. And really, this is about an electronic update and just giving it more advanced rider aids. Um, so we're seeing a lot of 6-axis IMUs disseminating down to some of those bikes that didn't necessarily have it prior, and just some little aesthetic fiddling here and there, but really Triumph is staying quite true to the Bonneville lineup as we know it. Now, sort of the more important thing, I will, well, maybe not say more important, but more interesting thing that we want to focus on here is the fact that Triumph is expanding with a new model, and that's going to be the Trident 800, which
Well,
uses the same engine.
just one sec. Sorry, Nick. I like the fact here as I'm going through this Bonneville update again. Just one quick note that I find hilarious. This won't matter to American viewers, but for Europe and other markets with a tiered licensing, the 1200cc models of the Bonnevilles and Scramblers and whatever will have restrictor kits so that they're A2 licensing compliant. So that seems hilarious to me. But
Yeah, I mean,
anyway,
that's a big engine to restrict.
I found that comical, but and worth mentioning because of a good laugh. But back to the Trident 800, yeah, super cool. I lost my train of thought, so pick up again on the Trident 800.
Yeah, so the Trident 800 is, expansion on the Trident 660, that similar concept, but a completely new motorcycle. They look quite similar. So if you just base everything off of your initial hit from the photos, you're like, oh, it's kind of the same thing. It's not. New chassis, different engine. The engine is actually derived from the Tiger Sport 800, so that means it is a 798cc triple cylinder engine, and it's designed a lot differently from what is found in the 765 Street Triple lineup. So it's just a torquier motor. I think it's a motor that's more conducive to something like the Trident 800, which is really positioning itself as more of a roadster. The Street Triple is a traditional naked sport bike. It's also homologated for racing use in the World Supersport Championship. And again, this is just speaking to something that is going to be a little bit more road oriented. So pretty excited about that model because the Trident 660 really kicked some ass in the that true middleweight naked category when it came out, because it was pretty flush. It had a beefier chassis, that 660 triple cylinder engine, just loads of character. And this just seems like the natural graduation of that same concept.
For sure. And I mean, looking at the photos of it, it looks sharp. The components seem pretty dang sweet, especially for a bike that's going to be under 10 grand. It's we've always loved Triumph triples. They're just, what's not to love about these things? They look cool. They go like stink, and the Street Triple has been a favorite of ours for who knows how long now. Interestingly enough, though, Triumph also announced that the Street Triple 765R is not coming back for next year. That might be related to this bike. It could be something else, because I mean the RX is still going to be around.
The RS is returning, but it's going to be a new RX model. It's a step up. So they're losing the base model and they're adding
There we go.
higher tier model.
Yeah. And we've seen that with the Speed Triple as well. So they're sort of ditching the base model bikes in the performance oriented categories and then adding an upper echelon to that. So you have the RS and then the RX versions, which are functionally a bit different because the RX versions typically have a more aggressive riding position, something more akin to the Moto 2 bike if I'm
Yeah.
getting the 750,000 Triumph models in mind. But
Right.
yeah, I'm pretty excited about this bike because the Trident 660 really, really put the screws to that class. It came in with a high spec, low price point motorcycle. So it was just, it really beat a lot of the competition with something that was just better. And for right on the door at 10K, you start looking at things like MT09, Street Fighter V2, and all the competitors, and you're like, you're showing a lot more for those bikes. But this thing's it's an attractive price. So pretty aggressive from Triumph. Want to see how it does naturally. Yeah.
That'll be good. That'll be a good one. Speaking of updates for bikes, Yamaha's R7 2026 should be a year of an update for what is one of our favorite engines placed inside. I wouldn't call the R7 one of my favorite bikes, but I do like that engine. Dennis, fill us in. What's happening with the R7? What's getting updated on it?
Well, first we know that the new R7 has a different model code, internal code than the the current model. So we know it's a new bike in some fashion. We also know that it has the engine code of the current MT07, which was updated last year with an electronic throttle with ride modes and traction control, which the current R7 does not have. So we're expecting all the updates from the MT07 to transfer over to the R7 as a updated 2026 model, probably with some new styling as well.
Seems plausible. Seems about right. I could be totally off base here, but I seem to remember, maybe Nick or Dennis can correct me, the current R7 has a cable throttle to electronic butterflies. Yeah?
Yes. It did not have a true ride-by-wire system, which is sort of the big advantage with the 2025 plus MT07 update. So aside from all of the chassis upgrades that the MT07 received, it was really an update about meeting Euro 5 plus standards and also just updating the electronics. So it's going to take a big step up there and really put it more on par with stuff like the Aprilia RS660, which has a full suite of electronics, IMU based electronics. Now, Yamaha did not specify, and we don't believe that it will be IMU based electronics for the YZF-R7, but that's kind of the logic. Also, Dennis did speculate in our first look story that there may be some chassis updates that would follow logically with the MT07 update, which received a whole new frame, new swing arm, became a much stiffer motorcycle overall. Granted, the YZF-R7 and the MT07 did not share a chassis in the least bit, but it does stand to reason that Yamaha will do some updates in that regard as well. So again, one of those things that we're kind of excited to see how it develops, because the R7 was a very compelling product when it came to market. In practice, my opinion of it is that it sort of didn't deliver the performance in relation to the super aggressive riding position that you are put into, in kind of the same way that the YZF R9 demands of its riders. So we'll see. That said, people will cite the fact that the R7 has won a fair amount of championships, especially it's won a whole lot of races in Moto America. But what we always want to remind people is race bikes are not production bikes. And you can do a lot of cool stuff with a race bike. And all it takes is money, guys. You just keep putting money into that hole. Eventually, it might go faster.
Might being the key word there. Yeah, should be good stuff. I'm excited about it. But before we move on to our last bit of news here, let's take a quick second to get a word from our sponsor. Time for a quick break and a shout out to the evolution of the Honda Goldwing. 5 decades in, and it's still the ultimate touring bike thanks to Apple CarPlay, selectable ride modes, and that legendary flat six engine. Add in Honda's DCT transmission, class-leading comfort, and a serious amount of storage, and it's easy to see why this bike has been setting the standard for so long. Because touring isn't just about the miles. It's about making every one count. Learn more about the 50th anniversary Goldwing at powersports.honda.com. All right, and we are back. And there's one last bit I've saved for the end of our news segment here, and that is the 2026 Ducati Monster, an iconic motorcycle that basically saved Ducati from extinction. It's getting an update, a fairly big update for next year. And so, where do we even begin? So, obviously, there is an all-new look, an all-new design, and the V2 engine, the new V2 engine that first debuted on the Panigale V2. So, let's see. Like, Dennis, help us out here. What's there to talk about with this new monster?
Well, you're right. It's the new V2 engine, which makes it replaces the 937cc model that was introduced in 2021. So that didn't really stick around as long as some of the previous Monster models. What's interesting is that the 2021 Monster was significant because it made it a focus of reducing the weight. So it was at the time the lightest Monster ever produced, and the new Monster is even lighter than that because the new engine is significantly lighter than its predecessor.
Right. We're talking about the way they do their weights is so ridiculous. 386 pounds wet except for fuel.
Yeah, so that's going to be low 400s when it's all said and done. Yeah. Dennis, this engine's the 890cc V2 engine is now used in the Multistrada V2, the Panigale V2, the Street Fighter V2, and now Il Monstro. Now, take us through the mechanical differences, if you will, because it does make a different peak horsepower than the other bikes mentioned, different peak torque. They are Mr. Potato heading the engine around for the sake of efficiency, as many brands do, but it's not the same thing.
One thing we didn't mention is that the new engine has variable intake valve timing. So that's going to make a significant difference as far as how the engine delivers, how the engine performs at both lower and higher speeds. In addition to the lighter weights, the engine's, like you said, is making its way to multiple models. And probably by the time this podcast airs, it probably will be on a new Desert X model as well.
So cool. as far as power goes, we're looking at a claimed power output of 110 horsepower at 9,000 RPM and 67 pound-feet at 7,250. Now, the Panigale V2 and the Street Fighter V2 made about 10 more horses and a couple more pound-feet. So, minor differences there, but what also works in all of these new bikes with the V2 engine, because of the fact that there's no longer the Desmo valve timing, with traditional springs, Ducati is able to get the valve service on this new Monster at 28,000 miles. For comparison, the Street Fighter V2 and the Panigale V2, their valve service intervals are at 18,000 miles, which is still great for a Ducati, but 28,000 miles for this Monster V2 is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely beneficial for the market because let's think back to early Ducati engines. I think my old 749 was spec'd at, I want to say it was 6,500 miles to check the valves. Right in that zone. Or maybe it was $6,000. I can't remember. I did it a little more often because of track use. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people are going to complain and lament about the, ditching Desmo valves, but at the end of the day, I would really challenge any of our listeners, fellow colleagues, to actually tell the difference between an engine that has a conventional valve train and a desmodromic valve train. I don't think that's possible personally. So,
Yeah.
maybe I'm just not that good. I don't know. We'll see.
No, I was thinking the same thing. Like, who really cares? I think we've seen now that the benefit of the Desmo valves is in racing applications when you need precision at high RPM. And just to obtain high RPM, then yes, the Desmo valves come into their own. At normal street riding? Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, like on the Panigale V4 and Street Fighter V4, it makes perfect sense because that thing is really just going to be super high RPM. But it also is the reason why the Multistrada V4 ditched Desmo. It didn't need it, and it benefited greatly from it.
No, absolutely. So I'm getting similar vibes here when people complain about 4 strokes taking over where 2 strokes used to be the hot ticket. Now purists are sad that Desmo valves have gone away and valve springs have made a return. It's like, come on, really?
Yeah. I mean, realistically, again, I would challenge most Ducati owners to actually say, do you do your own valves? Because to be honest, they could just tell you it's one or the other, and your mechanic is the only one that actually is ever going to see it. So, simmer down, guys. I know it's like, but it's part of the identity. I'm like, well, not yours. It was for Andrea Dovizioso because he was called Desmo Davi. That's his problem. And also, he doesn't ride for Ducati anymore. So, whatever.
Yeah, and then like when you're riding the bike, are you really going to tell a difference? No. So, anyway, the new monster, Ducati is really milking this new V2 engine as we knew they would. Both Nick and I have sampled the V2 engine. It's excellent. The bikes that they're now in are excellent in so much as they're more refined than their predecessors and lighter. That's always good too. This new monster, the styling of it. I mean, we can't forget the aesthetic of a Ducati monster. It is quintessentially Ducati monster, and yet modern and new.
Yeah, it really goes hard in, the modern and classic directions. I would say restyling the fuel tank and really going back to the bison back design, which is that rounded fuel tank that harkens all the way back to the original monster. That's something that's a more easily identifiable cue for monster aficionados. The thing that does stand out is the lack of the presence of any sort of frame. And that was a massive, massive, massive part of the monster's design language. Now, as with the prior generation, it kind of did lose that quite a bit. And as we move into this generation, even more so. So obviously the visual identity is changing a little bit, but it's gained some, lost some. As I always say, I don't want to speak for you guys in terms of looks because it is subjective. You may love it, you may hate it. But it is one of those things that manufacturers have to be careful with, because if they just made it look completely different and then still called it a monster, I could see some blowback on that one.
I mean, Ducati has already faced that backlash when they did the 999 and 749. So yeah. I guess they're trying to tiptoe the line there. But this kind of goes back to the conversation about the Brutale earlier. Yeah, the Brutale is new, but its styling is distinctively Brutale. Same thing here with the monster. You can tell right away that this is a monster, albeit visually a new one. And yeah, I wonder if designers find that to be a bit confining, having to honor a traditional, well-known style, or if it's something that they actually enjoy, is redesigning a motorcycle that has a lot of history and pedigree. So
Yeah. I mean, you're asking a question that Harley Davidson designers likely see therapists about. So, um, how do you design something new while also making it look exactly the same? Um, I feel like they struggle with that question more so than any other manufacturer.
I mean, yeah, same can be said about Aprilia and the RSV4 and Tuono. It's like, hey, here's the same bike visually for the past, whatever it's been, 14, 15 years. So, no, longer than that. Whatever it's
Yeah.
been.
Yeah, I mean, good looking bikes overall. Like, I'm not going to knock a Harley for looking like a Harley. It's just, how do you put a new twist on something that is intentionally designed to look old?
Right. Right. Well, Harley would come back and tell you, well, this is what our customers want. So why are we going to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But we
Anyway.
have some ad business to get into, don't we?
No, we just did an ad break, so we're good for that.
Oh, okay.
I figured we were going kind of long, so I wanted to put the ad break before the Ducati.
I'm also going to have to check out soon.
Okay. Well, we're pretty much done talking, Dennis, because now it's all about bikes we've ridden. So we'll try and keep this relatively short. Anyway, moving on.
Okay. Since you're going to talk about the CFMOTO, I'll introduce that for you.
All right.
Okay, so now we're moving into bikes that we've been riding lately. Current reviews are available on Motorcycle.com, so go ahead and read all of those words and look at pictures and potentially videos. But first things first, Troy, you rode the new CFMOTO 675SS. What is it?
The 675SS from CFMOTO. Now, you hear the number 675 and you immediately think of Triumph. It's got the same number that Triumph made popular. It has the same number of cylinders that Triumph made popular in the sport bike world. The CFMOTO is nothing like that bike. It is a completely different motorcycle. The architecture is all different. Everything about it is different. So this is not a copycat of an old Triumph Daytona. This is 100% CFMOTO's own design, own engineering, etc., etc. Like I mentioned, this is their, I guess you can call it middleweight-ish sport bike. It's a step up from the 450 SS, which bike that I really liked, actually. And CFMOTO has always been on a mission, if you will, to discredit the fact that all Chinese bikes are trash. Sure, a lot of them are. CFMOTOs, we've ridden a bunch over the years, and they've all impressed us with their fit and finish, their performance, their quality. Like, they're genuinely good bikes, and the 675 is no different. Here's where things get a little bit tricky. You hear 675, you hear 3-cylinder, you hear sport bike, you automatically assume we're talking about a high performance, high performing engine. This is not necessarily the case with the CFMOTO, and that's by design. When I talked to CFMOTO reps, they told me flat out, this is not a high-strung sport bike. Yes, it has that kind of styling, but they call it more of a streetable sport bike, and the engine would support that theory because power-wise, it only made about 70-something horsepower when I put it on the dyno to the rear wheel. Even the claimed number is 90-something. That's claimed to the crankshaft, so 70, mid-70s at the back tire makes sense. Now, you'll hear that, and you'll automatically think, well, that's trash because the Triumph makes 120 or whatever it is. But again, that's not the point here. I think, if anything, this entire episode, we've been talking about how motorcycles have kind of shifted to be more streetable, user-friendly machines, and the 675 SS falls in line with that. I rode around the street, rode it on the track. It's a good little engine. It makes all the right 3-cylinder noises. It's a little bit peppy. Um, Now, for me anyway, the ergonomics are a bit funny. The bars are low, but the pegs are a little bit like up and forward, whereas, which is a common CFMOTO thing we've noted on a few CFMOTOs in the past, is the foot positioning is kind of weird, which then places the your lower body in a weird position. But okay, different rear sets hopefully can solve that. Mechanically, though, it works just fine. I mean, has a quick shifter built into it, only on the ups, not the downs. You have adjustable suspension, front and rear. You have adjustable compression, rebound, and preload in the front. You just have adjustable rebound and preload in the rear. And you make a change and it actually does something, which is kind of nice. You've got steel braided brake lines. You've got, brake scoops for the discs and the calipers, which look kind of cool. You've got traction control. You've got ABS. You've got a really slick TFT display with easy to navigate buttons and displays. Like, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. When I took it to the rig. Go ahead.
Sorry. How's the handling on it? Because we know this thing, a lot of people are going to associate 675 with Triumph and have a slightly maybe skewed preconceived notion about what the performance should be. But realistically, this bike is playing in that pool of the Yamaha YZF R7, the Aprilia RS660, the Suzuki GSX-8R, or more accurately pronounced Gixxiter, and bikes like that. So it's in that middleweight sport bike category, not super sport, just to be clear. So
for sure,
for me, what I've really liked about that category is the fact that these bikes are a little bit smaller and you can really put that to use when you're riding in the canyons or on the racetrack. So how's it handle overall?
The handling is surprisingly good for what you're getting. I mean, if it were mine, I would make some tweaks. I'd get a better shock on it. I would, not that the stock one is bad by any means, but once you get to the customization stage, you want to get better. But stock for stock, it's surprisingly well sorted. The chassis has just enough flex to give you that feel, but it doesn't feel super stiff either. So like when you hit one of the many bumps on our canyon roads around here, it's not just like jostling you around. But it still has the kind of flex that allows you to toss the bike where you want it. You kind of have to muscle it to initiate the turn, but then once you get the lean angle started, it follows and it tracks pretty nicely, actually. Stuff you expect at a bike of this price range, like nothing out of the ordinary. It handles about commensurate for its price tag and about commensurate for the category of bike it sits in. Engine wise though, especially on the racetrack, like once you get the thing singing, it definitely checks out up top and doesn't really have much there. I thought it revved a little bit slow coming out of corners. The gearing is really spaced out. And so like at Chuckwalla, for example, I was only using third and fourth gear. I thought I'd be using more of the gears, quite honestly.
So conversely, you have a wide ratio gearbox, revs a little bit slower. If you were to put that bike in sort of an intermediate, someone graduating up from a beginner level bike, do you think it would play better with that skill set? Because it would allow them to just ride in a lazier manner because the engine isn't revving as fast. Plus you have that wide spacing, gives you a little bit more time to think. Now, you and I may not appreciate that because we want something that's, right there, zingy, zingy, zingy. But what's sort of the flip side for someone that's coming through the ranks?
Oh, I love having more time to think because I'm not very bright. If you're coming off, say, the 450 SS or something along that lower displacement category, this is a natural step up. I wouldn't necessarily say the same thing if this 675 were as high strung as, say, a Daytona 675. To me, that seems like a bit of a jump. Not impossible, clearly, but the gentler step would be the 450 SS to the 675 SS. If you're used to the way the smaller bike behaves, this is just a continuation of that with a little bit more power, a little bit more tech, a little bit more brakes, and a little bit more weight as well. But nothing that, if you're already comfortable with the smaller bikes, this is nothing that will surprise you.
Okay. So, kind of putting a pin in the CFMOTO, where do you feel it stacks up? You've ridden the middleweight sport bike category as a whole. So, without getting too into the weeds with a comparison, do you see it as a viable option within the aforementioned competitors, the Yamaha YZF R7, the Aprilia R660, Suzuki GSX-8R, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, because it costs a lot less than all of those bikes. If you take price out of the equation, it's not the best. But it's certainly not bad. And for the price, the cost difference between the CFMOTO and the others will allow you to get some choice upgrades that will make it as good, if not better, whatever that means to you, than the other bikes in the category. So I certainly feel it has a spot in the category, especially with the price tag it wears. It's like $8,000, something like that. It's very affordable. Pricing might change, will change for the following model year just because of inflation and tariffs and things like that. But it's still an affordable bike that has a lot of bang for the buck.
Cool.
So,
okay.
Going the exact opposite direction from a beginner-ish sporty bike to two hardcore, all-in sport bikes. Nick, you lucky dog, you've gotten off and ridden the Honda CBR1000RR-R, the pirate bike, and you just got back from riding the KTM 990RCR, the much anticipated KTM return to the sport bike category. So let's start off with the Honda. Not necessarily a new bike, but some choice upgrades to it. Tell us more about the R.
Yes, the R. This generation of the CBR comes to us back in, or it came to us rather, back in 2021. And it was a huge diversion from what we know Honda to really execute with their superbikes. Generally speaking, Honda always had a philosophy that really played well with street riders, with street riders, with track day enthusiasts, and also club racers. And they prioritized making a bike that worked really well on the road, maybe not as hardcore and race oriented as European manufacturers like Ducati, Aprilia, BMW would be doing. And so with the 21 Plus model, that ethos was gone. They've gone full hardcore, and they're really focusing on making what is by and large sort of a world superbike level homologation special. Because at this point, I think Honda's looked at it and gone, look, the people that are into this thing, they want hardcore. Okay, that's it. We know it's a super niche product at this point. Superbikes are insanely complicated, powerful, and expensive. So they're just going deep into the deep end, rather. Now, it did its time in World Superbike, hasn't had as much success as they wanted. And I wouldn't say they've gone back to the drawing board for the 2024 in Europe and the United States 2025 Honda CBR 1000RR. Oh God, the name's so long. Anyway, so for the Fireblade, rather, and they've done a lot of revisions. So with the engine, the 999cc inline 4-cylinder engine has, I don't want to say a top to bottom update, but it's significant. The chassis as well, electronics, suspension. Aside from the looks, The thing is significantly different from the 2021 to 2024 version. Okay, so let's start with the engine. It is still a typical 999cc inline four-cylinder engine, just a true screamer up and down, but it's shed a little bit of weight from the actual block. They've also redesigned the crankshaft, has new titanium conrods, has updated intake valves that shave mass off of it. Really, what they're trying to do is to get this thing to spin up more aggressively, which is already kind of like, I read that, I'm like, oh man, that's inline fours are already a bit hairy anyway. So yeah, and they've cranked up the compression with reshaping the pistons, doing some different strategies with the headwork, things like that. But realistically, in Europe, key point here, in Europe, this thing makes a claimed 215 horsepower and 83 foot-pounds of torque, which is just stupid. It's absolutely awesome, but it is ridiculous. Now, in North America, we have a North American specific tune, and the byproduct of that is some issues with that. On the dyno here, the Triple R produced 169.3 horsepower and 79 foot-pounds of torque. And when you look at the dyno graph that we have in the story on Motorcycle.com, you can really see that it's being electronically limited. And it's going to be because of noise compliance. Now, Honda is not the only victim of EPA noise compliance. Many other motorcycles are struggling with this in our market. Not to belabor the point, but what's the fix? You flash it. Okay, so as written...
Well, before you go on, inform the viewer of the second gear dyno pull we did on that bike.
Yes. That's where he's going.
Oh, sorry. Now, go ahead.
What's the issue with that and the North American tune specifically? As we've seen time and time again with other bikes on the market, second gear tends to get hit the hardest. So we actually show this in the dyno graph where, inline fours do take a little bit to wake up. In a lot of cases, they do tend to bias their power to the upper bend range and upper rev range primarily. But in this case, second gear on the dyno graph is a bit two-strokey. Not a whole lot's happening. Okay, then it gets to about 6,900 RPM, and it's kind of like hitting, the red button on the Soyuz rocket. It just takes off vertically. A bit two-strokey, rather. And that's a bit tough when you're riding this bike in the canyons because you can think about a long-geared super bike, and more often than not, you're going to be hovering in that first to third gear range, especially on tighter canyon roads. So you do find yourself falling into that emissions hole quite a bit. Now the solution is keep the revs up, slam it down into first gear, something like that. You can work your way around it, but a better way to work around this would just be straight up reflashing it or just getting a stock map from Europe because it doesn't have that issue. Outside of that, it behaves like a screaming inline four. It makes just an unholy noise that is so awesome out of the Akrapovic stock can that's on it. So it's a titanium lightweight Akrapovic system. It sounds sick. It is so unbelievably loud. So part of me is like, oh, it doesn't pass noise emissions. Also, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
But weren't you saying, I think you told me one of the ways that Honda makes it more manageable to harness all that power when you're coming off, especially a slower speed corner, is the split throttle bodies?
Yes, that is a big update. Wanted to feed into that. And split throttle bodies are something that you may have heard about when you're watching World Superbike or MotoGP. And basically it works like this. Traditional throttle bodies all actuate, their openings all at once. So cylinders 1 through 4 are all going like this simultaneously. Split throttle bodies splits the engine in half. So cylinders 1 and 2, I think it's like 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, something like that.
Yeah,
whatever. Basically, it splits the engine in half. And what that it really allows, a brand like Honda or anyone that's using split throttle bodies, because it's used all throughout racing, is to really curb that initial sharpness of power delivery. And so although the the map is not optimized in the North American market. When I took this bike to Laguna Seca and we were riding with Volant Vivere, how do you say Latin things?
Volant Vivere, something like that.
Yeah, Volant Vivere, a premium track day organization, operates out of Northern California. Low head count, but high time on the racetrack. Um, the main thing you're going to notice is that initial roll on. It's beautiful. I mean, the feeling is excellent, despite the fact that I know it's wrong. So the actual throttle mapping and how it executes delivering its power is quite good. It's actually a bit off-putting at first, or I shouldn't say off-putting, but a little bit interesting riding it, because the first time I really heard it after riding on the street, I was like, oh, it kind of sounds, burbly off the bottom end. And I was like, huh. But when I got it into higher RPM and I was at the racetrack, it almost sounds like you're being chased by like a twin cylinder bike or like an R1 is right on your tail. And you're like, oh, dude, is someone really close to me? Because this dude is like biting the screen, getting after it. Like, homie wants to, put the screws on. You're like, and you hear it and you're like, whoa. But just how it delivers the power, irrespective of the throttle map, is insanely good. Which is a really weird thing to say. Like, we're hammering this thing for the actual power curve itself, but getting there isn't as crazy. Now, an inline four in comparison to a V4, I think a V4's torque and the fact that it's a little bit slower revving by comparison, it's a little bit easier to wrap your head around, especially when you start breaking traction and you're kind of sliding and things like that. The inline four, like I always kind of forget how gnarly they are. I'm like, dude, these things are heavy duty, man. So Fireblade definitely lives up to the name. And yeah, the other thing that I really want to, congratulate this engine on and kind of hammer down on is the gearbox and the quick shifter. They're so good. We've noticed some issues with, different manufacturers in the recent years. Ducati's implemented sort of a transmission protection strategy in relation to its quick shifters. So there can be, some hiccups when you're shifting super aggressively, especially at high RPM. But the Honda, like the Aprilia that we rode, earlier this year, just, a quick shifter is dialed. And that's super important because when you're on the racetrack, obviously you're going to be working the shifter kind of in the heat of the moment, but more to the point, to get away from that emissions hole, I had to use first gear in turn 11 at Laguna quite a bit. So, you're coming out of turn 10 on the gas and then boom, 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 down in first gear. A lot of bikes don't like that. Like, most motorcycles just don't. It just ate it. Just didn't care.
For those who don't know, turn 11 is the last turn at Laguna Seca. It's a slow 90-degree left-hand turn that leads to the front straightaway. So you got to slow the bike down, turn it, and then fire it out to get to, the front straightaway as fast as possible. So all the things you were just talking about really come to light at turn 11.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a observation that cuts both ways. So yeah, you get into first gear, but now you're dealing with first gear, which can be a bit rowdy. So even with wheelie control in some of the photos, you can see me just basically standing on the rear brake to prevent the thing from coming up. Like, yeah, it has wheelie control. It's going to save you from looping it. It's still in first gear and you're just whacking it wide open throttle. And then you're heading into turn 1 at Laguna, which is over the crest. And although I didn't need to, because the bike's geared long, like superbike long, I'd still click into fifth gear just because it made noises and it was cool. And then you get to downshift even more aggressively into turn 2. But what I really enjoy about the CBR, 25 plus or 24 plus if you're in Europe, the softened chassis, basically. They've really adapted that thing. they've really adapted that thing and improved it, which it kind of has Honda-ized handling as it stands. And what we mean by that is it's just super user friendly. It's not hard edged. It's super nimble and just always encourages you to keep pushing because the edge grip that you get is pretty fantastic. It's a very, very compliant motorcycle. And I also think it tracks a lot better than some of the comparisons. Like what I kept coming back to is thinking about how a stock YZF R1 handled in comparison, which was always a little bit rowdy to me. And this just seems to hold its line a lot better. It also has a longer wheelbase too. So, whatever. Now, related to the chassis, it is using the latest and greatest from Öhlins. That's going to be the Öhlins. Now we're up to, Smart EC3 system, which debuted on this bike. The Panigale V4 has it, Street Fighter V4 has it, and the Triumph Speed Triple 1200RS has it. Now, Troy, you rode one of the first motorcycles to have semi-active suspension. Give us a little quick rundown of the YZF R1M back when you rode it in Australia and how interesting it was to use that stuff.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of electronic suspension for racetrack duty because the racetrack is the same. Each turn one is always going to be turn one. It's always going to be what it is. It's consistent. Electronic suspension tries to anticipate what's coming up and adjusts on the fly to meet the demands of the road, which makes sense on the street. But on the racetrack, you kind of know what you're in for. So having analog suspension is more beneficial in my view. Plus it's lighter. Having me think back to the R1M, it's been quite a while since I've ridden that bike. Not to say it works poorly, because it surely does not. But it was one example of many, not just Yamaha, one example of many that made me think, yep, I'd be fine with just regular analog suspension. I can dial my own clickers. Thanks very much, which I realize isn't the same thing that can be said for some other riders. I think the benefit of electronic suspension for some people would be taking the black magic of suspension out of the equation. And if you're just looking, I forget how they call it, the terminology behind it, but if you're looking for just more support on the brakes or on acceleration or on its side, you can just dial that in versus, I need more preload or I need more compression or rebound or blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, I see the benefit of it, but in certain circumstances, analog is better, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thinking back to the Gen 1 semi-active suspension systems from Öhlins, it just had some really irregular characteristics. You'd go into a corner one time and it would stiffen up on you. It would sort of not do the same the next. Essentially, you're looking for consistency, whether you're on the street or track, and it did the opposite of that. As we got into the second generation of that system, I would say those complaints are really falling by the wayside, especially as you start dialing in the suspension and making it behave within a certain set of parameters. Now that we move to this third generation, and my first time was with this on the Triumph Speed Triple. Sorry. I was already pretty taken by that. I was like, yeah, this is good stuff. Rode on the street, rode on the track. Same with the Honda. I mean, the big advantage, as Troy mentioned, is you just have a lot quicker flexibility with trying suspension tunings out. So you have your 3 semi-active modes combined with 3 static damping modes. So it behaves like mechanical suspension. And, just flipping them around on the fly, you can see appreciable behavioral chassis changes. I mean, the thing can go from fluffy soft to skateboard stiff if just by on the fly adjustments and
everything in between.
Yeah. So for me, being able to play with that at the racetrack, it really helps setting up a bike faster in a lot of ways. There's also a cool little feature on that's specific to the Honda where you punch in your weight and then it gives you a suggested preload amount. Now, things are subjective, so you kind of use it as a guideline, but really it's hand holding people into using their clickers before, because, Troy, we've both met riders at the racetrack are like, oh dude, I don't want to touch suspension, man. And you're like, yeah, well, it's there. It has stuff, like, use it. But that said, the handling, that's what really stood out to me about the Honda, because it works so well on the track and the street, and you put it in the softer modes and it's not punishing. You can't really say that about an analog suspended bike because you set it up one way.
Right. And I think what we're both getting at, I should also add that I tried the EC 3.0 that you also tried on the new Panigale V4S from Ducati. And my earlier comments about electronic suspension were about the first and second generation of this semi-active technology. With this new 3.0, just to piggyback off of what you said, this new 3.0 system is fantastic. Like, it is really, really good.
Yeah, it's just, I always found a way to get the second gen to work. The first gen, I think, was in its infancy, but to be kind about it, that's a polite way of saying it was garbage. The second gen, I know for a fact you can get it to work. You just got to put in a little bit of effort. Third gen, dude, it's so good. It's so good. It's so good. And yeah, And then you just go to how the thing handles on the brakes. It uses its length really well to just stay stable. And so when you do initiate a slide, which was kind of happened to me out of turn 6, just a pretty hairy place to have a slide. But you think about turn 6 at Laguna Seca, you drive up the hill, G out over the little crest, and then you're into a sort of a gravity cavity, essentially. You're really loading the chassis, and you're doing it, well, you're pretty much on the gas. You get into that corner, and as soon as you can, you're on the throttle. So you're binding up the chassis and just, And so, as the tires started wearing down, because I was using a Pirelli Diablo SC3 tires, which is the track day tire, essentially, high grip tire, lots and lots of grip, not quite up to a slick, but, late in the day, it's getting a little bit hot. I'm getting a little bit lazy. And, you have some slides and how the chassis can recover, dude. That is a nice motorcycle. They've also updated the ergonomics a little bit, added some more real estate to the side of the fuel tank. Still, it's a demanding motorcycle. It's a super bike. Low clip-ons.
We could talk about this bike till the cows come home, or you can read Nick's review on Motorcycle.com to get even more of his thoughts about the bike. However, I think we should tackle the big news of our time. KTM 990RCR. We've been waiting for this thing quite a while. You got to go to Spain to try it on the street and the racetrack, and I am extremely jealous of that. Is it all it's hyped up to be, or no?
Well, that's a tough question. I'll answer it in respect to the rest of the class. I think with the evolving next generation super sport class, and we've seen the Yamaha YCF R9, the Ducati Panigale V2 spearhead that movement, I think within that respect, it is another motorcycle that is evolving that class into what we will see happening in the future, which is going to be more torque-driven motorcycles that have a slightly more street bias. And I don't see that as a bad thing at all. I think manufacturers are developing motorcycles that are simply putting their feet planted in both the street worlds for the average consumer and the racetrack for your track day guy, potential club racer, et cetera, et cetera. Because race bikes are just a different thing, man. And you can upgrade them. And, the YZF R9 didn't win our comparison, but it won its maiden Moto America and World Supersport Championships. So like we mentioned before, just race bikes are different. But getting into the weeds of the KTM, I think they did a fantastic job with that bike and separating it from the 990 Duke, converting it into a racier trim with a 990 RCR. There is an appreciable difference between the two. They have clear, distinct personalities based on what engineering decisions they made. So starting at the top, the engine, bolt for bolt, same thing. The muffler is a little bit different just for the, some sort of ergonomic purposes. Headers are apparently the same. Engine is a copy and paste job straight into it. 128 horsepower and 76 foot-pounds of torque out of that 947cc engine. Now it revs up to about 10K. And first we got to ride the thing on the street. So parallel twin engine, nice and torquey. It's got loads and loads of mid-range. That's pretty much what you want for a road bike because you're going to be able to start from stops nicely. It's not going to be super high revvy. You're always going to have a good hit of power to get out of problems with traffic. And then when you're in the canyons, you always have good torque to just sort of leap off of corners and have a lot of fun. It's also a pretty excitable engine as a whole. Yes, it is a parallel twin, but it spins up with that sort of, KTM always builds some aggression into their products. And it definitely has, I don't want to say a mean streak necessarily, but it's got some naughtiness to it. And that's really palpable on the bottom end specifically. As you get up top, there is a trend with parallel twin motorcycles, or the engine configuration rather, to sort of taper when it's really getting near redline. And that's still happening here. I'd say by about 9K-ish, just as you pass peak horsepower, that's when it sort of levels out. But it's a good engine on the street. For the track, dude, same deal. I mean, it has some overrun, like I mentioned before. It's not as like zingy and lively as an inline 4 600, but what you gain in terms of torque and mid-range, I think is beneficial when you're on the street or the racetrack. So yeah.
Does it also make it easier to ride for longer?
Yes, I would say that because it's probably less intimidating. Sending a bike up into that 14,000, 15,000 RPM range, as much as you and I like it, super sport fans like it, that's something that you do got to work into. Because I remember the first time I rode one, I was like I got to keep going. And this is coming from riding a lot of twins. You're like, where a parallel twin kind of starts to sign off, an inline 4 is kind of just getting going.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, okay. And you're like, dude, oh man, I don't know. And yeah, it's a different vibe for sure. And I think between the torque, between the accessible mid-range, and just its overall character, it's a little bit easier regardless of your skill level. So that's an important factor.
I mean, I say that in regards to when we rode the Panigale V2 for our Super Sport test. One of the things I kept coming back to was that Ducati was so easy to ride. Is the KTM like that as well?
It's got a little bit more displacement. It's got kind of a meteor hit, and it's a little bit more aggressive. I would say that maybe kind of just off the cuff comparison, maybe because the Ducati comes in with a little bit lower horsepower, not as quick, doesn't rev up quite with the same aggression. That might be a little bit more user-friendly than the KTM. But all of that still applies whether you're talking about the R9, the V2, or the 990 RCR in relation to traditional high-strung i4 bikes.
Right. Yeah, get into tell me more about the tech, about the ergonomics, chassis-wise. I mean, we've discussed the engine.
Yeah,
but
engine's a big part of it, but really the story for this evolving supersport class is the chassis and ergonomics. That's super critical. Same frame as the Duke, more or less, especially visually. The main changes is there's going to be some additional bracing for the spars that come down, and it's adapted to accept suspension linkage, so progressive linkage. The swing arm is also unique to the motorcycle because, again, it needs to have all of the stuff to accept linkage. And what does linkage do for us? Well, it allows manufacturers to utilize lighter spring rates. It also just encourages better handling dynamics overall. So when the bike's pitching onto the rear end, when it's pitching forward, it's able to control those movements a little bit better, arguably. And really, you're able to have what I would argue is just more accurately sprung and damped stuff. And so ride quality improves while also improving handling and grip. Super important. And they've also changed the chassis dynamics overall. So yeah, it's a Duke derived frame, but it's now a more weight biased frame or riding experience overall. Sorry. It also has unique suspension. So it has WP Apex suspension, much bigger 48 mil fork, fully adjustable, has preload adjustment. You know, WP's war on preload seems to end in this case. Fully adjustable shock with high and low speed compression as well as rebound. So it's pretty high level spec stuff. It also works really well. And again, started our time on the street. And what blew me away is just the pure compliance of this thing. It's not as hard edged as the i4 bikes, which are just super stiff. Even if you really back off the suspension, it's inherently stiff. You're riding around on public roads in Spain. Some are smooth, some are not. You know, you're riding near farm roads and whatnot. We rode on a lot of stuff that was like really bumpy. Things that would just truly rattle your fillings out if you're on something a lot more, you know, racetrack oriented. And in that sense, you're like, damn, they did a really good job here. This thing is comfortable all day. Kind of speaking about comfort is the ergonomic side of it, where you have a lot of leg room, a lot of room front to back. It also has a unique subframe and fuel tank to this application. So there's a lot of real estate to brace and hold on. And then it has the mild riser clip-ons, which for me are just smack between the YZF R9, which are dead flat traditional clip-ons, and then the super high riser Panigale V2. And it's just between the two. So if you're a little lazy with your core activation, you can start becoming a bit wristy, but it's going to extend the ride and it's going to be sporty enough on the racetrack too. So comfort wise, you're pretty much right there. Now taking it to the racetrack, you're like, okay, well, it's comfortable on the street, yada, yada, yada. Okay. But can it do a track day? Yes. The thing can rip a track day. I mean, that suspension, you just dial it in a little bit, but it still maintains that compliance. Now, in our case, we were using Michelin Power Slick 2 tires on the racetrack, which is essentially just the Michelin Power Cup 2 treaded tire, which is just a DOT sport tire. Both track capable tires, follows the typical Michelin design ethos of, you know, hard carcass tires. And, you know, my lap times versus the Panigale, I think they're pretty comparable. They probably like right on top of each other, give or take. I think
that's right.
A little bit faster.
You rode the Panigale at the same track.
Yeah. I think it went a little bit faster, personally speaking, on the Panigale V2, but we were on true slicks back then. But I would have to look at that.
Yeah,
realistically,
it's hard.
They're pretty close.
Yeah, and it's hard to compare that when it's different days, different tires, different conditions. Like,
yeah. But not for nothing, pretty darn close. Now I know between the professional riders that were there, we had Johan Folger, who is a KTM development rider of MotoGP fame, used to ride for Yamaha, and dude, sick. Anyway, he rides motorcycles real fast. And he went considerably faster than the Ducati test riders, which KTM staff were quite enthused about. So there is that. Now, realistically, as a track day machine, you're like, whew, it's got all that compliance, but it can become more hard edged. And when you start putting the thing in the stroke, the handling characteristics do change a little bit. On the road, I feel that it's quite agile from sort of dead off center steering, you know, just neutral. You got big bars, you know, wide place bars. So you got a lot of leverage and it steers nicely. Yeah. You're real good. All those characteristics track in here. Um, on the racetrack, it does change a little bit because the thing is quick to get into a corner. And then once it's on a set trajectory, the thing is just on rails. And again, that's one of those observations that has positives and negatives to it. I would say it's not as forgiving as, say, the Panigale V2 in the sense that you might not be able to correct lines as quickly.
Hmm.
And then conversely, on transition, it's not going to be as agile in that regard either. But importantly, it's not going to take the same effort that the YZF R9 did. Think back to our comparison with the R9, specifically at Sonoma going into the S's. I have vivid memories of just pushing on those handlebars. Like, you steer, you expletive.
I mean, I have,
yeah.
for me, I have vivid memories of that Ducati just bam, bam, just flipping side to side.
Dude.
It'll just toss and turn wherever you want it to go.
You fluff a line on the Ducati and it doesn't even matter. You can just pull it back to the apex. Like, the thing is so forgiving in that regard.
Yeah.
Arguably, the KTM sits between the two because it has the stability of the R9, but it's just easier to ride because it's just a little bit more agile.
Right.
Not as agile as the Ducati from memory. But those stand out because, dude, the leverage I was putting into that R9 was like kind of insane. And you don't need anywhere near that on the KTM. Now, talking about the electronics, it's got the full suite, optional. That's KTM's strategy. Love it or hate it. Most of the people in our comments hate it. I can't say I'm a big fan either because we are comparing it to the rest of the market, hiding a lot of the extended features. It does have 6-axis IMU, supported traction control, corner and ABS, all of that good stuff in standard trim. To adjust those features, get the leveled traction control, adjust wheelie control, etc., you have to spring for those extra accessories. Now, KTM isn't as offensive as BMW with its accessory strategy in that you just get the tech pack, $899 on top of the $13,949. Boom, said, done. You get the quick shifter, traction control, telemetry, adjusting all of the things, and it's done. Whereas BMW would be like, yes, you want everything? Well, we segment everything into the most painful packages of all time. If you guys don't believe me, go to the BMW website right now. Look at the 2025, 2026 S1000RR.
We talk about this endlessly.
Yes.
Amongst ourselves, anyway.
Yeah. And the base price of the S1000RR is 10 grand more than the one that's as shown in the photo. It's like, dude.
Yeah.
So,
it's
okay,
maddening.
look.
But anyway, back to the KTM.
Yeah, be mad about the 899 if you want to be. I'm not too thrilled with it either. But there are worse offenders out there, my friends. Anyway, moving on. All that stuff works. I would say sort of my complaints with the bike overall. The quick shifter is notchy. As you start wailing on the engine, it clears up. I could say this about a lot of the KTMs I've used over the years, where I would say the quick shifter is probably not the best. Is it bad enough not to use? No, because interestingly, when you're really banging down downshifts, it doesn't hang up. And we've had that, the Panigale V2, for example. It's not a huge detriment, but it's there. Also related to that, it's now a fully faired motorcycle. So you trap that spicy engine in an enclosed space, and it's going to vent a lot of heat. Unfortunately, at low speed, it vents it directly onto you. The solution there is to just go faster. And in terms of its performance, pretty stoked on it overall. And I think it's just going to be a really good addition to this evolving class.
Naturally, that means we need to get the V2 and this together to settle who's top dog once and for all.
Oh, absolutely. You compare this against the YZF R9, the Panigale V2, base model RS. And that's another price point thing we need to mention as well. KTM really wanted to slot between the two main competitors, and they did more or less. When you factor in that 899, it's still cheaper than the Panigale base model V2, which is $15,995. So it's cheaper by about $1,000. However, the Yamaha is priced incredibly aggressively at $12,499. Going to the top end again, the Panigale V2 at $18,995. So, damn near $20,000. This thing, $13,949 plus the $899. Okay, not cheap, but not $20,000.
So. No, but yeah, it's gonna be an interesting, because we have to do this comparison. A continuation of our super sport test we did earlier. We wanted to have the KTM in that test, but it wasn't going to be ready in time, so we carried on and substituted the Gixxer 750, all reliable over there, for the KTM, which held its own. But this was the test we really wanted to do. So in due time, we'll put together the Panigale V2 and the 990 RCR and really see who comes out on top.
Yeah. And, KTM has announced that, one, they're back in production. This is the first bike to essentially go back into production. And European markets are going to get it before us, obviously, because,
always.
KTM is in Austria, so there's that. We're expected to get it, they said, hopefully kind of by the end of the year. That'll be arriving in dealerships. So, late this year, early next year, depending on how things shake out. Hopefully we can get that comparison done sooner than later, because it's going to be super interesting. And it's just, I got some thoughts. Like, I want to confirm some thoughts, but you can always get caught out when you're doing comparisons, because when you really have all the bikes in the same room, it can surprise you. Those initial first rides, or say you've ridden something for a long time, you have experience with it, and then you jump on it back to back. That's what kind of separates the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. For sure. So this is everything you've just said just kind of reaffirms all the hype that I put in my own head about the KTM. And I'm excited to try it. I'm excited to compare the two again and just see what comes of it, because it's looking pretty spicy. If you want to know more about the CFMOTO 675SS, the Honda CBR1000RR-R, or the KTM 990 RCR, there's more R's for you. Of course, you have to go to Motorcycle.com, read our full reviews there. Lots of relevant information, lots of pictures, lots of stats, graphs, what have you. Go there. Yeah, I think as far as this podcast goes, we should probably wrap things up, don't you think? Yeah. I think we've exhausted all of these. Euro 5 exhausted all of these bikes. That's a good segue into the end here. So that's going to wrap things up for this episode of the Bore and Stoke podcast. As you are watching this, as this episode has come out, EICMA will have just finished up. So we will hopefully do a dedicated EICMA overview for our next episode. Maybe, possibly, I hope. That's the goal there. The timing of this is a bit off for such big news like EICMA, but that's the way it goes sometime. All right, so like we usually do before we sign off on this bad boy, if you are listening to us on Spotify or Apple Music, please leave us a rating, hopefully a good one. Let us know what you think. All the good thoughts, good vibes, and good ratings does help us out. If you're watching this on YouTube, there really is no rating system there, but, say something nice to us. Wouldn't hurt. So, I think... anything else you want to say, Nick, about anything? No. Let's wrap this bad boy up. There we go. All right. So the next time you see us, hopefully we'll have all 4 members of the crew back to talk and chat with you.
But yeah, that does it for this episode of the Bore and Stoke podcast, brought to you by the 50th anniversary Honda Goldwing. As we always say, thanks everyone for watching or listening. Ride safe, and we'll see you on the next one. Ciao! That wraps this episode of the Bore and Stoke podcast, brought to you by Honda Powersports and the 50th anniversary Honda Goldwing, celebrating 5 decades of raising the bar in motorcycle touring. From its smooth flat 6 power to its advanced rider aids and modern tech, it's the gold standard for a reason. So whether you're serious about long distance or just long weekends, if you're gonna ride something legendary. Discover the 50th anniversary Honda Goldwing today at powersports.honda.com.